Very cool. Well, very diverse class, a lot of different backgrounds. But one thing, if you're a leader in any of these capacities, you're going to have to put together a budget. How many of you guys have your own personal budget now? All right, cool, awesome. Then this might be, makes sense. So if you don't have a budget, that's okay, because you're in college. So it's basically just feed yourself, entertain yourself, and go to class, right? And the rest of it can kind of just like fall into place however it goes. But all right, so the focus for our class today was going to be talking about how, for hotels and hotel operations, we sort of kind of put a budget together. And some of the details, high-level overview, but then also some of the details on how that goes. So, quick question. So what do you guys try to figure out if you're trying to put together your own budget? Do you try to figure out, how do you approach it? Do you approach it first to figure out how much money you have, and then your expenses, or your expenses and then how much money you have? Yes, sir.
It's the expenses that you can't get away from, like your rent that you're going to have to pay and like your bills.
So you
know those first, so you know how much money you absolutely need.
So you go and get your apartment, whatever your apartment is, and then you go and figure out whatever other bills you're going to have. So let me ask you this: how does your the apartment company that you get grant you a lease there?
Like based on like your credit report and like your yearly income.
Okay, cool. There you go. Based on your credit report and your yearly income. Okay, someone else had something to say in the back, Colt?
Now, if I have a personal budget, I separate them out by like fixed expense and then variable.
All right, awesome. Yeah, talking about fixed expenses, and the variables are, of course, the expenses you can control.
Where the fixed expense, that's something that you cannot, like, that has to be there, like car payments.
Sure.
That has to be there already, like insurance that cannot change, but like something like to be changed, like will be changed on the variables one.
Okay.
Control like the bills of the day, what do they eat, like, so that's
sure.
how to, like, control the personal budget.
So you guys talked on a couple of things that are important. So there's two major types of expenses, right? There are, everybody? Yeah, all right. Well, I like the participation. And that variable, yes, and someone's excited about variable expenses. And you should be, because you can control those. And the other thing we were talking about, and you brought it up, what was your name again, sir? Adam. You mentioned that to get an apartment and to figure out where you're going to live, they will probably have to verify your income somehow, unless you have student housing or something like that. But that's still included in probably part of the amount that you're spending to go to school. So I would challenge that what you have to figure out first is how much money are you actually bringing in? Because if you don't know how much money you're bringing in, how are you going to know how much you can spend? I mean, do I have rent for $300 and share it with like 4 or 5 people, or do I, live in River Oaks, the top, apartment or condo, and spend like $50,000 a month? It all depends on how much money you're bringing in, and all that is basically relative. So in hotels, when we start approaching budgets from a high level, we really like to work on the income. And for a hotel or any business, the income really is the revenue, how much revenue you're producing prior to your expenses. So ideally, during budget season, we really try to come up with how much the next year we plan to produce in total revenue. And for a hotel, say my hotel is a Hilton Garden Inn, or say like a Courtyard, what would you think is the primary producer of revenue for the hotel? Rooms. All right, cool. Yeah, rooms, absolutely. Although different hotels like the Hilton Garden Inn, we do have banquets and we do have a bar, that amount in proportion to the total revenue, it's much smaller than the percentage of room revenue that drives the total revenue. So you got to figure that out. So what can you guys tell me would be some ways that you can figure out how much revenue you're going to make the following year? On a personal side, with your personal budget, it might be easy because you're like, okay, well, I just got a raise, so that's 3% or 5%, so I can kind of account for what that's going to be in the following year. But how do you figure it out in a business, or how would you start figuring it out in a hotel? Yes.
You're forecasting.
Okay.
You're just going to see what you're forecasting for your occupancy and your ADR, and then you'll just multiply the two together to see what your revenue will be.
All right. Awesome. Cool. That's having your forecast is put together. So how would you guys? Oh, go ahead.
Knowing the events that are going to be in the city for the next year. So if it's if there's going to be a Super Bowl or any major event.
Sure. Very important. Absolutely. Yeah, very good. Is Madeline?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Very good. So your forecast, events for the next year. What else? I did see someone else wanted to mention something. Yes, sir.
Benchmark year prior.
Benchmark year prior. What do you mean by that?
So you look at what you made same day previous year or same quarter previous year.
Okay.
You can assume that you're going to do that, or take that number as a benchmark and then adjust based off like 1-2% what fair share you want to take on top of that, and then use that as your forecast.
Sure, perfect. That's a great way. Man, you guys have you guys built budgets before?
Yes.
Yes, you have.
Assignment 3.
Wow. Okay, let's see.
They personal
They did assignment 3. Very cool. Good job, Professor Koh. That's awesome. All right, perfect. So you got your forecast, you got special events that you're looking at. What else? There's one more thing you might want to look at to see, or two more things actually.
competitors.
I'm sorry? Competitors, perfect. So your comp set. You want to kind of get a sense of what they've been doing, what they have planned. What's one event that a competitor might have, just in general, that might create some additional demand? What's something that could be going on at
Overflow at another.
overflow?
Like a convention or something.
Okay, convention. So that's more like,
Host everyone.
but a specific hotel, like maybe in your comp set. What could they have going on next year, or
Oh, renovation.
renovation? Yes. So renovation may shut down some of their rooms. So whenever you take rooms offline in a market, it creates compression for the other hotels. So it'll feed business into other hotels, and you got to pay attention to things like branding. So if you're in a market with, like the Galleria, it was the Homewood, Embassy Suites, Hilton Garden Inn, they opened the Home 2, and then the Hilton Post Oak. So, and then also the DoubleTree. So if one of those Hilton products takes rooms offline, chances are it'll probably benefit another or all the other Hilton products first before it benefits the other hotels. So that kind of intel is important. So one other thing about the market, your competitors, but also the market in general. What else could be, thinking in terms of supply and demand? What else could be important on those terms for putting your budget together?
Like your pipeline. Like what's
New supply, like hotels being built that are in the. Okay, awesome. Yes, thank you. That's good. What else might be important? This is a little bit more difficult to figure out and really requires the efforts of your sales team, possibly your revenue manager as well. Yes, go.
The number of guests staying.
Number of guests going to stay. That's going to be kind of related to your occupied rooms, but what I'm trying to get at is something that could influence the amount of occupied rooms that you expect. I'm sorry?
group sales?
Group sales? Sure. There's one of.
My guess is going to be like population increase. So if you're in an area
Okay.
that has a lot of other hotels like the Galleria, but like I know a lot of people have been moving to Houston, things like that, or like hotels that are built in more like areas without as many people, but they are quickly developing, things like that. I think that you would have to not necessarily make a lot of assumptions, but you're going to have to kind of calculate what that growth is going to be in the future, because it won't be the same as it was last year.
Correct, because you can be in a market that's has economic growth, and that economic growth is driving jobs, is driving population increase, is driving different things, which is causing people to want to build there and have that. Or you can be in an economy in a market that's shrinking. So one thing that I was trying to get to, which kind of relates to that, is any major demand generators that could be entering a market. So, for example, if the Galleria was being built and it wasn't there yet, and it was going to be built, and this was the plan for the Galleria, say back in the 60s or 70s, do you think that facility would be a major demand generator or not a demand generator? Yes. All right, cool. So people would probably want to flock and say, well, there's going to be construction crews, there'll be training teams, there'll be the people developed, there'll be all these different things. What about if, do you think demand will go up or go down if a company like Chevron leaves the market that you're in? Demand will go down. So based on how many guests, do you think you'll have more guests or less guests than the previous year if you did nothing else different and then that happened? Less. All right, cool. So you guys, some of you, I think, Megan, you may have mentioned like group sales. Sorry, I said Megan, Emily, right?
Emily.
And Monique.
I'm Monique.
Okay, cool. So group sales could come in more into play. Or if you have, what really gets tricky is what if you have Chevron leaving, but you have Halliburton moving in. Okay, they're not really the same. They're in the same industry, but they're kind of different in what they do. So you have to really figure out and quantify how that will impact. Is it going to be a wash, so you won't have any impact, or are you going to, is Halliburton travel a little less than Shell, and how many rooms does that account for? So really there's a lot of questions that you're going to have to be asking when you're creating your top line budget or really your revenue budget. So all these considerations you really have to make in. And the better questions you ask and the more questions you ask, the better that can be. That can go for you. Yes, Emily?
So when in the example you just gave, if that was actually happening,
Mm-hmm.
how as a manager or, with your sales team or your group sales or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
how do you start that relationship? Like after you've let Chevron go and you have this brand new company, like I assume you don't just show up and say, I'll host you all the time.
Sure, that's a really good question. So ideally, in this scenario, the company has decided that they're leaving the market. Like they're moving their corporate offices that was generating, say, 1,000 room nights at your hotel and maybe 20,000 room nights, 15,000 room nights in the market, and they've taken it to another part of town or another city. In that case, and then there's a new one coming in, ideally these two companies in this example, Chevron, Halliburton, they're both big national companies that more than likely have a person on Hilton or Marriott or Hyatt side that is sort of working with the main travel people for those companies. So these kind of like higher level people relating. So what on the ground level, what you have to do as a GM or as a director of sales, more importantly as a director of sales really, is having relationships where both aspects. You can start in and have a relationship with your Hilton sales rep for that national account, or somehow you find out how to get through all the gatekeepers and into the offices of the local person or the travel department for Halliburton or for Chevron to do that. Because if there's still some travel from Chevron, you want them to stay with you versus the other company. You want to be their go-to person. Even though they're going maybe from 1,000 room nights to 200, you still want them to stay with you instead of your competitors. So great question. Any other questions about what we've been talking about so far with top line revenue? All right, cool. So another thing you want to think about is trends, but trends relating to how your revenue is coming in, specifically how your room revenue is coming in. So have you guys heard of room segmentation or room revenue segmentation? Mix of business, yeah, that's another way you can set it. Okay, so go ahead, Monique, tell us what mix of business is.
So mix of business is when you have transient versus group business.
Okay.
And so you'll have like a percentage of group sales, a percentage of transient.
Mm-hmm.
Transients can be broken up into leisure and business.
Sure, perfect. So that's great. That's where you start. Is you go transient versus group. Is one going up or one going down? And then you have to kind of figure that out based on some of the things you guys have already talked about. What is your comp set doing in terms of that? What historically for this year have you been doing? The same quarter the previous year that you're budgeting for. What did you do? And what would cause either one of those to go up or go down? And with group, it's pretty much related to the special events that we have. Do we have any known corporate groups that always repeat, or they don't repeat, or they repeat every other year? Do we have conventions that repeat every other year? One big convention here in Houston is the Offshore Technology Conference. So OTC next month. All the hotels here are going to be busy for it, but not as much as in years past. Which I'm going to digress here, but another factor that can influence business at your hotel, or specifically with travel, is oil, the price of oil. So if oil price goes up, historically we've seen that travel also follows. It's a leading indicator of what will happen with business travel here in Houston. If the price of oil goes down, like it did, and it reached like $20-some a barrel back in, I think the beginning of 2016, the bottom falls out and everyone's scrounging for business, and we're playing rate wars with each other to see how low can you go. And it's not a fun game to play because the less money that you can charge, the less profitable your business becomes. So that's a little side digression as to another main economic indicator that can drive how you budget. So back to segmentation. With transient, it can be a little bit challenging because there's different segments that go through that. So you have to figure out what are the recent trends for your rack. Rack should be your highest tier. That's what you, me, and anyone else would pay if we, say, looked up Hotel Zaza and we wanted to stay there. Whatever is published, that's basically your rack rate. And then you also have to take into consideration government rate. What's the government per diem? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is there going to be a government shutdown? Oh no, there is. And I get like 15% government business. So how's that going to impact it? So if this seems kind of exhausting, thinking about all the different things you have to ask questions about, it kind of is, because you go through it, but that's why you don't do budget in like 2 or 3 days. You can't really cram for your budgets, because if you cram for your budgets, you're probably going to set yourself up for failure the next year, because it really is all about planning. So some of the major segments are, of course, RAC. Then you have your local negotiated or your special corporate in general, local and national. Government, you'll have discounts like all the associate travel plans. You'll have AAA. You'll have different discounts. And then you'll also have your redemption travelers, those folks that come in using points for Marriott or for Hilton. And of course, you'll have all the online travel agencies or OTAs. So you'll have all that kind of feed into it. So all of these things you have to consider when really trying to build your top-line budget and your room revenue budget. The other thing I was going to mention is you want to look at historical data too for yourselves and also for your competitors. You want to see historically how they've done, so that when you build your budget, you're sort of within range. Like going back to occupancy and ADR, if you say that March of next year we're going to do 90% occupancy, and the comp set historically has done 75%. So why would that be driving you so high? You have to create explanations for that. You have to really, put a good plan together. So now I'm going to take a quick second to show you guys, hopefully, something here. Let's see if I do this right. I might not do it right. We'll just be staring at a blank page. Oh, here we go, I think. Here we go. Alrighty. Nope. All right, so you guys might receive, and I removed the names of the hotels here, but you might receive a document if you're the general manager at a hotel or the director of sales. It looks something like this, where you're going to basically be shown lagging years, 3 years behind, 4 years behind, and kind of what this is your target here. So sometimes you'll have your company or the owners of the hotel actually send you what your target is going to be. So they're going to say, in this scenario here, can you guys see okay? Let me just go like this instead of looking there. All right, so like right here, it's saying for this hotel, say this is my hotel, and then this is next year. Then it's saying that for occupancy, we're going to decrease by 3.8% in the first half, and then another 3% here for a total year negative 3.4%. Now the comp set's going to also decline, but they're declining more than we are. So our index here for occupancy is going to be 1.0 as far for the growth index. So that's good, because you're basically saying you're capturing more than your fair share of occupancy in a down year. Does that make sense for occupancy? Okay, cool. But the best indicator here, and what we all like to focus on, because it blends both occupancy and ADR, is RevPAR. So you build your RevPAR, in this example, you build your RevPAR target or budget, move this out of the way, by, combine the two, and then so property and comp set, first half, second half, here's the full year, and here you're saying, well, you're actually missing it. Because if you're at an index of 99.3, that's not exactly great. But at the same time, you are actually growing your RevPAR versus your comp set is actually going down in RevPAR. So you have a growth index of positive 1.6%. But your actual raw dollar index is only at 99.3. Maybe you're under renovation this first half of the year. So sometimes companies might send out targets or create a sheet, something like this. This is just one example from a previous employer that I had, but I thought it'd be good to kind of see how all that goes into play. So this is very high level. We're not talking about, is government down, is my national accounts going? This is just overall big picture. This is about what we think we're going to do. So in order to figure out what would be reasonable targets, what's some for your revenue, in this case being measured by RevPAR, what would you guys think would be some tools or resources that you can use that are out there, that exist, that you've learned about? If you haven't learned about that, that's okay.
Star reports.
Star reports, okay. Someone else said that over here. All right, what is your name, sir?
Brian.
Brian, and what does the star report show you?
Basically shows you the information for all other properties around that are in the same segment.
Sure. So it shows yourself, it shows a relationship between your hotel performance and the collective performance of however many hotels are in your competitive set, which could be 4 hotels, could be 6 hotels. I think the largest one I've seen is like yourself plus 7, so like 8 total, 8 or 9. So yes, so the star report helps because it also shows, the previous year to this year how you're doing, and you can take some data from that. Or if you have some of the historical star reports, you can also compile that to look. So that's one tool, using your star data. What other tools could you use to find out if your targets or if where you're planning to go on a broad scale makes sense? Where else can you find your market knowledge? No answer is a wrong answer because you guys might not know. So just try to think. From what you've learned in your course of study, juniors, seniors, what do you guys think? And how about if you're not thinking about hotels and you're thinking about restaurants? This is totally another area for me that I'm not really well versed in, but I'll give it a shot. Anyone?
Well, how do you know if you're going to be successful?
Well, how do you know what you're setting yourself to do? Like, what tools can you use to help you find out if the revenue targets you're setting for yourself make sense before you start getting into all the nitty-gritty stuff?
We're going to use historical data as well.
Historical data? Okay. So you'll look at how your hotel performed the previous years, how the comp set performed the previous years. What about for wineries or for beverage? What would you do there?
We would look at historical data, but specifically where our top revenue generators were. Was it gratuity purchase on site, or was it the stuff that we sent out to get on wine lists across America?
Okay.
Most of the time it's stuff on site. It's about 60-70% of the revenue, so you withhold most of your wine, you don't put it out in the market.
Okay.
So if someone's telling you, no, you need to put 80% of your stuff out, that doesn't seem quite accurate. The industry standard and your historical data.
All right, cool. So industry standards can maybe come in play. You could look to see how a specific hotel brand, what traditionally the RevPAR has been, or what their index normally is across all the comp sets for that specific brand. That's certainly helpful. There's another tool with hotels that helps you find out what companies are traveling or not, or the room night production of certain travel agencies, and then you can find out what companies those travel agencies book. So you can use reports from they're called Hotelligence reports, but they really come from TravelClick, is a company that a lot of us hoteliers, we subscribe to for them to provide market data to us. So it shows us basically these are the amount of room nights that this particular travel agency, which normally books for Coca-Cola, are bringing into the comp set versus ourselves. And if we're not getting our fair share, or the comp sets is getting a lot of the room nights in the market, we really want to answer why and figure out why. So understanding industry standards, understanding historical data, using tools like travel agents, like TravelClick, Hotelligence reports, those are all very important things that you're going to need to use in order to drive and create the top line budget. You also want to figure out if the rate that you're saying makes sense, also by looking at historical data or your star reports. And which of these two, I guess they're all important, but would you rather make, I guess, $100,000 by selling more rooms or less rooms? Another way to look at it, would you rather make $100,000 by charging more or by charging less?
Less rooms.
Less rooms. Okay. And why?
So less rooms to sell.
Less rooms to sell, so all the operating costs for those rooms goes down because you sold less rooms, but you make the same amount of money. So the way you could still make the same RevPAR, but you're driving it either through OCC or ADR. So if you're driving it through ADR, it's going to be more profitable. So if you, yes, go ahead.
But would you rather make $100,000 in rooms or $100,000 in additional revenue? Because isn't rooms a lower cost versus food and beverage tends to be higher, not so much beverage, but food because of labor costs and all that kind of stuff and inventory and things like that. So even though it would be better to sell less rooms and make more profit, would it also be better to sell rooms opposed to food?
Interesting. So would it be better to sell more rooms opposed to food?
Your cost is lower.
In specifically for a hotel, that it would be, if you're trying to, let me put it this way, I guess. If you're trying to ease the burden of like your food and beverage operation by selling less rooms, that's not a good strategy, because we identified earlier in this class that room revenue is the primary source of revenue for hotels. So you want to make sure you don't sacrifice room revenue or sell less rooms to try to help promote like a food outlet. And typically, if you sell more rooms, you're going to produce more revenue in all your outlets, whether it's catering, whether it's the specific restaurant, etc. But in the specific example, I was thinking just, if Hotel A sells, I don't know, 1,000 rooms and they make $100,000, but Hotel B sells 750 rooms and they also make $100,000. Hotel B that sells less rooms is going to be more profitable because they're making the same revenue, but the amount extra in ADR, that premium in ADR that they're charging, all of that just flows straight to the bottom line, which helps your flow through, which is another thing that I'll touch on after we go through expenses. All right, guys. So I've talked a lot, but I haven't heard as much from y'all. Do you have any questions? I know this stuff can be kind of boring sometimes, but do you all have any questions about how hotels or how we create top-line budgets, top-line targets? Anything? Yes, Adam.
Question kind of about what you just said. It might kind of relate to the question she just asked. So if you could sell this half of the room,
yes,
hotels, and get the same amount of money as if you sold the whole classroom rooms, like if you charge more for us. But wouldn't it be better to sell the whole classroom rooms at a discounted rate? And because then once you have all of us, you can sell us food, you can sell us alcohol, and that's more money coming in than if you can only sell us food or alcohol on this side of it. Because most places have bars and restaurants inside their hotels.
Sure, a lot of full-service hotels do.
Wouldn't you want to sell both, get less money for the rooms from everybody, and then you can get amenities from everybody?
Right, to a certain extent, to a certain degree, yes.
Okay.
You would want to do that, but you do want to maximize the amount of revenue. So if you're thinking through the lens of I want to maximize my revenue opportunity and minimize the cost involved, then yeah, at a certain point, I'm not sure how many economics aficionados are in this class, but at a certain point, you're going to get to like an equilibrium where if you go below it, you're getting less and less profitable. But if you stay above that, then you continue to marginally improve and increase the amount of profit that you're bringing to the bottom line. It's not a non-profit. We're a for-profit business, whether it's a restaurant, winery, hotel, whatever it is that we're trying to get involved with. Unless you guys are into non-profit work, which is totally cool. God bless you. But there's other things you want to try to reach, I'm assuming, because I'm not very familiar with the nonprofit world. But anyway, yes, you would want to get incremental revenue from selling more rooms, but you don't want to necessarily sacrifice some of the rate integrity to do it, because if you do that and you're below the market and then everyone's trying to generate fake demand by lowering prices, that only works so far. So then at some point you might be selling the same rooms you would have sold anyway, but just you're selling it for less. So now you're leaving money on the table. So it's a balance, and you never are really going to know. You almost never really know exactly what that right balance is until it happens, and then try to learn from it and make better choices in the long run.
But I think with the example you gave, I don't know that it would necessarily be worth it because of our age, the spending tendencies tend to be more cost sensitive, and even though we might be spending money at the bar, we might be buying food, I don't know that you necessarily want that crowd. You want 40 college-age kids drinking in your bar versus
I probably would
all
not,
the money that you have to spend, or all the money you're losing because you're giving so many people a discounted rate when you could have a normal rate for half the amount of people and then just leave those other rooms available to people who may be more loyal or not as price sensitive.
Sure, absolutely. It's very true. And it also kind of depends on where you're at. Out in the energy corridor, we operate differently than, say, downtown or the Galleria, because there's a different I mean, the weekends come, and why would people want to come to the energy corridor on the weekend? So that kind of changes the dynamic too. So we might start offering lower rates, and we might have people in the bar. Or we might say, hey, let's book a meeting that brings in $1,000 of revenue, but it's going to be free breakfast, it's going to be this, but it's going to bring in rental and AV, it's going to bring $1,000 because that's additional revenue that we wouldn't have, that our competitors aren't getting because we're doing that. So there's those considerations to make too. Time of the year, day of week, and historically in hotels, if you're able to bring in business that helps cover Thursdays and Sunday nights, which are called the shoulders, and you guys probably have heard that too, that's highly helpful because those are the most difficult days to cover. Cool. Good conversation. Yes, Alejandro.
Can you share with us a strategy that can help you get lenders to invest in your hotel?
Strategies to help with lenders investing in your hotel? That is a great question. That is invest in developing your hotel or invest?
You're renovating or you're starting a hotel?
Sure. I'll give it a shot. All right, Alejandro. It's hotel development is a little bit outside of my scope in what I'm experienced, but I've learned a little bit along the way, so I can kind of piece it together.
Well, one thing that you said that is really difficult when people have tried.
So what becomes difficult, I guess it could be a lot of different things, but in general, if you're trying to develop a hotel, say on the west side of Houston right now, you're going to have to figure out how to make the data work for you because there's so much already developed and being developed that how are you going to fill all of the space? So if you open up do you want to open up a 100-room hotel or do you want to open up a 150-room hotel? That's also important to note. A lender might be more apt to say, well, they're going to drive better RevPAR by building. Their chances that they'll drive a better RevPAR index or RevPAR growth year over year in their first 5 years of being open are probably better at a 100-room hotel versus a 150-room hotel versus a 200-room hotel. So at that point, a lender might say, it's riskier to give you a bigger room because how are you going to fill all that space? You have all these competitors. You have where is the demand coming from? So you would have to have a good business plan where you can show that, or probably even show a track record. I do know that all the major brands. So if you're trying to get a franchise to grant you the rights to build their franchise, that's going to be tough because you're going to have to show a certain amount of net worth that you have or that your company has. If you have an LLC, the LLC has this amount of net worth. The franchises want to see that because they want to know that you have a track record of in business or in developing businesses. Now, if you want to go ahead and open up like a Days Inn, that's going to be a lot less criteria than if you want to open up, say, a Hilton Garden Inn or say you want to open up a full-service Marriott or Hilton. Also, lenders will probably look more favorably if you already have the franchise agreement for, say, like developing a Hilton Garden Inn or I keep saying Hilton Garden Inn because that's my brand, so if you can't tell, I'm a little biased. They will probably, that will be one in a long line of factors that could act favorably in your behalf to do that. Of course, also credit history and reputation. Then you want to decide whether you want to go with the institutional route and try to go with big banks and commercial lenders, or are you going to go more the private route and try to raise a fund and create a fund where people will invest in that fund? You tell them, I'm going to give you 1.5 times the amount of money that you put in here. This is going to be your return rate, and you can expect that in 7 years. And then people invest. They want to take a chance, because if you don't have no track record there, they're taking 100% a chance on you. And then you go ahead and develop the asset and deliver on what that is. Now, if you deliver like 1.75 instead of 1.5, hey, they're probably going to, hey, take my money, Alejandro. I want you to make more of this money for me. So that's very general terms, since I don't understand all that goes into it. But I do know that market conditions could definitely delay work. There was a Crown Plaza out on the west side. It said, coming soon, Crown Plaza, 2017. And then that sign got faded. And then 2017 came and went. And I think the sign eventually got removed. So people were in the process of getting all that granted, but they could never go and make it all the way to where everything had the green light and they actually got to break ground. Which maybe was a good thing, because the last thing you want to do is break ground and then you run out of money and then you have to sell everything that you've started, which does happen a lot in commercial real estate and hotels specifically. Good question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Question? All right, cool. So now I'll take this away. Let me see what else I got here. Go ahead and turn this off for a second here. Yes. All right, I might be getting decent at this. All right, great. So now, once you figured out all your targets and everything on the top line, now you're going to try to figure out your expenses. So the expenses are everything that gets in the way from your revenue going to the bottom line, correct? All right, awesome. So just shout out, so what are some of the expenses that you guys might expect a hotel to have? Labor, yes, that's great. Adam and Emily said that at the same time. Excellent, because that's probably your number one expense. It's the biggest expense you have, and it's also, is it fixed or controllable?
It's kind of controllable. I mean, it's a little bit of both, actually.
It's a little bit of both. It's a mix.
I would say it's...
Why is it a mix?
Because you can't have no employees there, but you
Okay.
can limit how many employees you do have there.
All right, cool.
How is it working?
And then?
Like it's, I'm trying to, we just did a project where you could kind of say how much is absolutely necessary and how much is, what is the word that we use? I don't remember. Not variable, but like you could
like flex?
Maybe cut off $200, maybe cut off $300, but at $500 you're spending, you're going to have to spend it. And there's like some wiggle room for you. So I think it's like he said, it's
a mix of both.
Necessary, slightly variable, but you have to have it.
Sure. So if you sell 10 rooms, you're going to have at least one housekeeper that has to be there to clean those rooms. If you're open 24/7 at a hotel, so you're going to have someone there overnight. At least one person is going to have to be there overnight. The other part where it might be fixed is your salary expenses. So your salaried managers, depending on how many or how few you have, those are typically fixed, but then if someone leaves, then you bring someone on board, and that can throw things out of whack a little bit. But yes, your labor is highly important expense that you have to consider. What other expenses do you guys have? Do we have? Wait, yes?
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, okay. So your internet costs, it's good. Utilities? Insurance? What's that? Rent, yes. Rent is sometimes, and depending on the company, rent, management fees, your franchise fees, sometimes those can hit below the line. So you'll have your GOP, and then you'll have like your rent, your taxes, and your insurance. Someone said insurance. You meant what kind of insurance?
Like fire insurance, flood insurance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, all your risk management type things. All your insurance to cover, basically the cover your ass stuff. So in case someone slips and falls, you want someone to have your back, not try to go at it alone. But you also have all your benefits. So all your insurance benefits. Are you contributing to a 401k? Are you matching a 401k? You know, all these things are things to consider. All your utilities expenses. Those are certainly, in some cases, they can be controllable. But if you have free-to-guest television, that's typically going to be a set expense every single month. Yeah.
Do you know, is 401k matching, does that normally, like if you have your employees at your location, does that matching where does that matching come from? From you or from like the parent company? Like who's paying the 5% matching?
I believe that would come it depends on how the organization is structured. In my previous company, it was a owner that managed most of their hotels, just about all of them, except some of the ones in New York. But the hotel I worked at, they set that hotel up like its own LLC. So it was LLC, so like Schwartz International LLC, DBA Homewood Suites, or DBA Hilton Garden, or DBA Hampton, and whatever it was. And the expenses would come directly from the hotel's P&L for any type of 401k matching. So you'd have to figure out what percent of employees are eligible, and what percent of those eligible employees are actually going to want to contribute to the 401k that will have to match. And normally it's done in like a percent of sales or a percentage driver. So that's another thing. So talking about variable expenses, we have things that we call drivers that drives that expense. So instead of being like, oh, I'm going to spend like $500 in housekeeping, and then this month I'm going to spend $100 in housekeeping, we want to have like a driver. So one of the popular drivers for this labor expense, housekeeping, is minutes per occupied room or hours per occupied room. So people typically get paid an hourly wage. So if you try to compute in how many hours per occupied room it will take to clean the rooms that you say that you have sold for that month, it'll allow you to have your labor expense for housekeeping go up or go down based on the amount of rooms that you sell. Does that make sense? So typically you might think, okay, well, in a select service hotel, housekeeper could take maybe about 28 minutes to clean a room, just average time. Checkout rooms are going to take a little bit longer. Stay-over rooms take a little bit less. So you create whatever your target's going to be, and you can even put that across all the months. And as the rooms go up and down, so will the expense for that department. And then if you know that you're not going to make your revenue, you can make cuts and you can make considerations there to help with that. Does that make sense? So HPOR is one driver. Percent of sales is another driver that we would use. So instead of just saying, for maintenance, I'm going to spend this much total in that department every month, and then just out on a whim, say how much it's going to be up or down. You do it on a percent of sales driver. That way, as sales go up or go down, you can see on there that that you can flex or you can flow as it states. Utilities are also done on a, I think, percent. They're done on a percent of sales. And sometimes one company will do it one way, another company will do it a different way. What other expenses could we have in hotels? We said Wi-Fi, labor, utilities, rent. Amenities, so all your guest supplies, linen for the rooms, cost of sales, maintenance, so like all your HVAC, plumbing, just basic supplies for maintenance. Marketing, yeah, very good. So all your sales and admin stuff, not just the salaries for your sales folks, but also what kind of marketing promotions are you going to have? What kind of trade shows are you going to have? Another very important one that whatever business that you had, you want to make sure that all your licenses or fire safety annual expenses are accounted for in the appropriate months. Because the last thing that you want is to be shut down in any aspect of your business or your entire business only because you did not pay or renew the permit. So it could be an elevator permit, it could be a combustible waste permit, grease trap permit, it could be tons of permits. Super boring, but super important. Got to make sure you get all of those in line. That's, for the most part, those are the expenses. And you got to use tools. I mean, it's all about finding the right tools to use to make your life easier when you come to budget season. So one of the things that you can use is a template like this one to talk about labor. If I can turn this on. There we go. I think. Maybe not.
I think it's on.
Nice. I am not technologically savvy, but that's okay. Or it might not be okay, actually. All right, so this is just, again, an old template that I have where I hid in some columns that have like the rates, but you basically can use a template like this to make the different considerations that you want to have. So what would be something that's important to find out? Say, let me see how to phrase this. So you're coming up on budget season, and you're looking ahead to how much your labor is going to cost the next year. What is some questions? What are one or two questions you might want to ask yourself to figure out if there's going to be any changes? Madeline.
Seasonality,
okay.
Based on location.
Okay, so if there's some type of seasonal component,
like you're going to take longer to clean a ski resort room.
Sure.
Than you would a non-mountainous region, because you have to account for the debris and also water damage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Or do you have to shut down part of the ski resort and contract labor to come in, or use your own labor to come in to do like preventative maintenance and all those kind of things to get that up and running? And then when do you do that? Yeah, absolutely. What other considerations do you have to take into play for labor?
How many labor hours needed to complete certain jobs?
Sure, labor hours. So we talked about hours per occupied room, but how many labor hours, for example, how many shifts do you have budgeted? How many hours total do you have budgeted, or have you currently used in this year or historically for front desk to know exactly how many people you could schedule or put on the schedule for next year and budget next year? Another thing that's important is pay rates, how much people are actually making. So what would be important thing to not omit when doing your budgets for the for the next year regarding wages?
You got a raise.
Okay, so raises. So does the company have, a merit increase type program? So most of the time the answer is yes. So when does that happen? Does it have an anniversary date? Does it happen one time a year? And is it normally 3%, 5%? These are all considerations. Typically, what we budget is 3% for the different employees. So however you want to figure that out. It's a lot easier for budgeting when it all happens at the same time of year, but when it happens at anniversary day, that could be a little trickier to really figure out where you're going to put it in. Or do you just do it annually, just do 3% and increase it 3% across the board? You can do that as well. But one thing you also want to make sure you do is, are you paying your folks enough? Like, is your hotel in line with what the market kind of is paying wages? So if you're paying your front desk folks $8.25, and your competitors are paying your front desk folks $10.25, but you just completely omit that, and you go ahead and budget $8.25, and that's what's going to drive your total numbers, and that's how you're saying how many hours you're going to use, and it's all based on $8.25. But then you come to realize you can't hire anyone or you can't retain any people. That's going to be a big problem. So making sure you do some sort of wage analysis for the market, just like you did revenue analysis for your market. That's going to be vitally important to make sure you have a good budget. Yes, sir.
Speaking of the concept of the wages,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you're in Hilton, do you usually set the concept based on around hotel or just based on Hilton? Because I found out that actually the law friends and also me,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to Hilton during Galleria.
Oh, yeah?
So I found out actually Hilton pay a little bit less than other hotels.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, at the Galleria area, Hilton pay less than like Hyatt or even Marriott. So I'm wondering, do they set a concept around that area or just based on Hilton?
That's a great question. What is your name?
Bugsy.
I'm sorry?
Bugsy.
Bugsy? All right, cool. Nice to meet you, Bugsy. Really good question. And the answer, you're not going to like it. It depends. It depends. It's not a set rule of thumb. Rule of thumb. All right, whether it's set by just the Hilton properties or other hotels or what it is, because actually we compete for employees with other businesses other than hotels. We compete with restaurants. We compete with Chick-fil-A even. If you live out, how many people have stopped at Buc-ee's on the way down I-10 or down? Okay, everyone's nodding their hand. Awesome. So Buc-ee's has clean restrooms, and they advertise how much they pay their employees. So if you're within a certain mile radius of Buc-ee's and you're hiring hourly employees, you're going to have to notice that how comparable is what I'm asking my folks to do to what Buc-ee's is asking their folks to do. And does that make sense? Like I can't imagine that because we don't have a Buc-ee's close by. But if Buc-ee's is paying like $14 or $15 an hour for a cashier, and I have a front desk agent, and we're paying them, in this example, $8.25, I mean, I'm not going to want to work at my hotel. I'm going to go to Buc-ee's. A lot of cool food, cool snacks, beaver nuggets, all that good stuff. So also the other thing to consider, Bugsy, is are you comparing like for like? Like, are you you're saying Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt. But in the Galleria, all those players have a different configuration of owners, management groups, or some might actually be managed by the franchise. So that's going to also determine what they're paying and how they figure out what to pay. I've worked at a company where they request like market data research to create like a wage scale and to see how the wage scale compares. And the wage scale has a minimum, middle, and max range. I've also worked at a company that said, here you go, figure it out. So the hotels that you are comparing yourself against are anywhere in that spectrum, and that's the tough part. I will say that in general terms, over the last, I think a year and a half, 2 years, the labor market for the hospitality industry as a whole has been changing and evolving because people are we have to keep up with inflation. So if you keep paying people the same thing, then their dollar is not going to actually go as far. So $1 5 years ago is not going to get you the same stuff that $1 now is not going to get you the same. How am I trying to say? $1 5 years ago is not going to buy you the same stuff now that it did back then. So we have to account for that and make sure we're not lagging behind. Other industries are emerging too. The shared economy. Like, what if someone could go work for Airbnb or Uber or Lyft or something else, on a corporate side or whatever, versus your hotel, they have an opportunity maybe to do that. There's also competition in temp agencies, contract labor for housekeeping and stuff. They might say, oh, we're going to pay people more. Might not offer benefits, but they're just going to say on a dollar for dollar basis, like we're paying them $10, you're paying them $9. And then that can create a problem. And also finding, not to get political, but there's a lot of controversy and a lot of stuff about immigration going on right now in our country. And that can kind of have positive and negative repercussions across the board. So, companies, more and more companies wanted to move into E-Verify and actually using the E-Verify tool to ensure that their staff is legally allowed to work in the United States. And if they find that they're not, then they might be without a certain percentage of their staff, depending on the company, depending on what part of the country they're in. But here in Texas, and being in the Southwest with such a close proximity to Mexico, that's something to consider as well, as far as that. So I kind of got off track with your question, Bugsy. But does that answer it in a way? It all depends. But I think at the end of the day, you want to do the right thing. So we don't want to hire you at like $11.50 just because we feel like this is where the right spot should be, but yet our associate over here that's been working for 4 years and is awesome associate is only at $10. And they might be at the high end compared to their peers at our hotel, but then now we're bringing you on that's higher. That to me is unfair. And although people might not find out, people are going to find out. Because you tell people, don't share your wage, it's a personal thing, it's a private thing. Somehow people start talking or say things, and then people will find out. So more importantly than that, even if no one found out, it's just not the right thing to do to that associate that's been working hard to recognize them and appreciate them and make them feel like they're contributing to hire someone else that maybe doesn't have the same experience that they do and that's a brand new person at this higher rate. So that's a consideration. That was kind of my point too with before you asked your question. Is you have to consider, does our wage make sense across all the departments? Yes or no? No. Okay, which department is lagging? Yes, it's this department. Okay, so what is that increase going to be and what's that cost going to look like? How can we make it happen? So these are all, and some companies might not even do that, which is why you might find big wage disparities or big wage discrepancies between hotels in a market. Yes, go ahead, Monique.
Would scale and stuff also affect wage? Like an employee at a Hampton Inn may not get paid the same as an employee at Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100%. A Ritz-Carlton, if they're making like $100 million a year, for example, versus a Hampton Inn that's making like $7,000 a year, they're going to have a lot less employees, number one. But number two, the markup on a room at a Ritz-Carlton is much more than, I would think, is much more than a Hampton Inn, or you would expect that would be the case. So you can only stretch your revenue so far before your margins become so small that it no longer becomes profitable for an owner to really operate the business. So that is a consideration. So a Hampton Inn employee might make $10 an hour, Ritz-Carlton might make $14. But if you're managing your hotel, someone is going to apply for a front desk job and say, well, they're paying $14 over here. And they're going to look at you with a straight face and say, the Ritz-Carlton's giving me 14. And you're only giving me 10. That's not okay. And you're going to be like, I don't have time to give you an explanation on why that makes sense or why it doesn't make sense. Because in their eyes, they're just going to see it as, well, I'm doing the same job. I'm bringing people and checking people in. And they might even argue, well, I'm doing more at your hotel because I have less departments and less support. So that's a good question. That definitely is a consideration to make. Or also scale, but also like where, like a rural hotel is going to pay their front desk probably different than an urban hotel. Yes, ma'am.
How do you account for overtime? Because I know that's definitely a part of the labor budget, but how do you determine if it's better to pay them the overtime versus just paying them salary but giving them more hours?
Great question. Typically, I have not budgeted for overtime. So you're trying to create, the budget is sort of like your target or your goal. Overtime is costly, so you shouldn't really budget that way unless it's built that way in the second part of your question where you have an hourly employee that you're paying and you pay them, like, say, part of their pay. They're up to 40 hours, but they really work 50 hours, so those extra 10 hours are paid overtime, and then that's part of their total compensation. Meaning that if you then only have them work 40 hours, you're like, hey, you don't have to work 50, only work 40. But then now they're not making the salary that was agreed upon before, because they're not salary, they might be still technically hourly, and a lot of entry-level manager positions are structured this way. So that is certainly a consideration to make. In that case, you definitely are going to want to budget overtime. Or if you're changing a position to be more of a manager position, but you're still going to pay them an hourly rate, but you're going to account for those extra overtime hours, you want to put that into your budget and explain that that's why you're over by $10,000 in this expense line year over year. Yes?
What do you think about, like, as a manager, and I'm not sure how much like direct hiring you do for different areas, but what would you think if someone came to you and was like, I'm interested in a management position, but I want to be on an hourly wage?
Just off the bat, I'd do the same thing I did right now. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me why. And I would ask them what's their reasoning behind it. Right. So I would try to find out more information on like why they would want to be on like an hourly wage. And I guess they might just say, well, that way I can clock in, clock out. If some weeks I work 40 hours, some weeks I might work 50 or 60. So that way I know that I'm getting paid for my time, like being here. Maybe that's their reason why. I wouldn't be against it, but I would definitely, I might have to say, we could do it, but at some point I might have to say, you cannot work past this time. Like you're finished. So if it's a new manager learning their job and they haven't done it before, that might be tricky because it depends on the person. I mean, sometimes the learning curve can be very high. I had a very large learning curve when I was a supervisor and trying to figure out how to learn everything. So, I mean, I sort of generated overtime myself just because I was trying to figure out how to do it. And it'd take me a lot longer to do the stuff that I can do now. So it depends on your manager. I mean, that person might say, yes, absolutely, sounds great. But then when they start seeing it on their P&L, they say, oh, we got to cut you back significantly, versus a salaried manager be like, oh, work all you want. You can come in whenever you like and work as long as you like because the cost is the same. So it kind of depends. I would be 100% open to it, but it would have to make sense for our business and for the person across different levels. So it'd be a good conversation like we're kind of having right now. Cool. Very good question, guys. All right, so this was just a tool I was putting together because normally when you present at your budgets, you're going to have multiple things that you put together. And the other item I wanted to make sure I showed you is that some of you guys, I'm sure, want to start your own business. Alejandro, you want to start your own restaurant. You're going to have to create some sort of, this is called an asset maximization plan, but really it's a business plan for this year. So it's no different really than a business plan overall when you're starting a business. Because as you'll see, you have the outlook and strategy summary. You have all these different components that really would go into a business. You even have a SWOT analysis. What is a SWOT analysis? And threats. All right, awesome. Channel strategy, that's your mix of business. And you have all these things that you have to take into consideration. Really, this is like your playbook, your guidebook for the next year. And why those numbers that I showed you before, like this is the how you're going to achieve those targets that you set for yourselves or that someone set for you. And so part of a lot of what goes into it is all the market conditions. I mean, before you can have an idea on like what you might do, but then explaining it was really going to come from the market conditions. So, for example, Hurricane Harvey. If you're budgeting the year after Hurricane Harvey, you're going to have very skewed numbers. Why are you going to have very skewed numbers for 2018? If you're sitting in 2017 budgeting for 2018, why would your numbers be?
You were closed for several days.
Okay, you may have been closed for several days, as some hotels were. It's definitely one. What else?
Even at 100% capacity.
The opposite end. You may have been at 100% capacity with probably pretty strong rates in some cases. What else?
You may have damages or repairs that you have to do.
Okay, you might have damages or repairs you have to do maybe after the people check out, so you're going to have to shut down some of your inventory the next year. All right, what other stuff might make it really challenging?
the revenue from the Super Bowl?
Yes, good job.
That was all in the same year.
Yep, that was all in the same year. So you have the end of the year, you have all this revenue increase, and the beginning of the year, you have all this revenue increase. Neither one of which is repeating in 2018. So both of them you would almost have to extract out of your data compilation for, like, how would we have done in 2017 without that lift? And that's a very tricky thing to do. That's going to really require a team. Revenue analysts, your director of sales, a lot of Excel and macros, also the market data and what folks like Star or CBRE is saying for the market, what type of impact that has. That's you're going to want to try to look and see what that, because you're going to almost want to extract Super Bowl and Hurricane Harvey to then see the next year. Okay, this is what we did. We did our ADR, our RevPAR was 99.9 without Super Bowl, without Hurricane Harvey. So what would be a natural increase the next year for that? And you want to then use that as your budget and your assumption. Yes, ma'am.
Would you be able to do that within the guest notes by putting whether or not they were a Hurricane Harvey victim or if they're just there for business?
Yes, I think that you would have to track that some way. In some way, even if you don't put guest notes, you might be able to see like
company name.
Right, like under a company name, you could put like FEMA evacuee. You could put that under company name, or you could build a group block and have all your FEMA evacuees go in there, and build another group block and have all your FEMA workers go in there. So those could be some ways that you track it. Then you personally for your hotel, you can see what the impact was, but then you can also see how much demand came into the market for those events and subtract that demand. It's tricky, but so that was a very challenging year for budgets. Next year should be, I think, a little bit simpler. We hope. All right, so this is just an overview for this business plan, and something that is really, every time we have to do one, I feel like I have a college project that's due, because essentially that's what it is. You have like a giant report to complete. And in a perfect world, you would refer back to this plan, and it would be a living document. Have you guys heard that word before? Okay, it never really is a living document. It gets filed somewhere, it gets put off somewhere, and the company says every quarter, they're like, hey, well, what about your marketing plan and this? You got to get back to that. Is that still working? So it's tricky, but if done effectively, and maybe not as complex as some of the stuff I've shown you, it can actually work, and it can actually help your business. But now that you create your budget, in some cases, do you have any questions on that? I know it kind of went kind of quick, but I just wanted to show you guys a few of the examples of some of the things you might be working with. No questions? All right, cool. This shameless plug for my hotel. There we go. Let me see my little message. Yes. So once you have your budget built, now you're in the year. But what's the difference between the December 31st and January 1st? Huh? Someone said that? Bueller? Oh, some people still know that movie. That's great. That's good. Okay, so it's a new quarter. Okay.
New fiscal year.
New fiscal year. Other than that, it's more just like intellectually that something has changed. It's basically just going Monday to Tuesday or Friday to Saturday. So a previous company that I worked for would always joke that like nothing's going to be different from what you're doing now and what's happening now at your hotel between this day and this day. All it is one day changing and then one number changing on the year. And it's just the calendar year changes and that's it. Which means that your budget almost starts 3, 4, 5 months before it actually happens in terms of sales. So if you're not doing things to get business going and to put the marketing strategies that you have in your business plan together, then you're already going to be probably 3 or 4 months behind when you hit the next year, right? So forecasting almost becomes like your new budget. So every quarter, a lot of publicly traded companies, what they'll do is they'll tell their hotels to basically mark or provide a guidance for this next quarter, that essentially what you tell them you're going to do becomes your new budget. So that basically is what they hold you accountable to. So if you budgeted to do like $500,000 or say you budgeted to do like $1 million in quarter 2. But based on market circumstances and what's happened in quarter 1 and things that you maybe didn't know at the time of budgets, you know now, that $1 million is actually going to be more like $750,000. They're going to hold you accountable to that. So now your excuse can't be, oh, I missed my budget by $50,000 and I missed forecast by like $30,000. They're going to be like, well, why did you miss forecast by $30,000? What caused that? Like, what changed? Because you told us that you were going to do X, Y, and Z, but you didn't do it. Like, you didn't achieve that. So forecasting becomes very important, and it's also just as tricky as budgeting, because at the end of the day, no one knows exactly what's going to happen the next year or what you're going to do. Your budget is your best guess, your best educated guess based on the tools that you have. And then your forecast becomes a better guess and a better informed guess, because no one has a crystal ball and can tell exactly what's going to happen. But in general, that is basically a very quick and high-level overview, hopefully somewhat interesting overview of the budgeting process as it relates to hotels. You guys asked some great questions throughout, but I do want to open it up if you guys want to ask any more questions. And it could be run the gamut, all right? It could be budgets, it could be flow-through, it could be GOP, it could be anything. Alejandro, yes? I cannot finance your hotel, I'm sorry.
Regarding the occupancy percentage, because I know that it's not ideal to have it at 100%. You don't want to walk a guest. It can really hurt your reputation. But what do you think is an ideal percentage for a hotel? Is it somewhere around 90?
Ideal occupancy? I would actually say 100% is probably ideal. 100% at the right rate would be ideal. But it's tricky because, like you said, you have to understand like how many people normally cancel on a daily basis. Like, what's your average? And I worked with one company that had like, on a Tuesday, it would have you break out and have like an average per day of week. So it would say, okay, on Sunday, we know like 2 people cancel. On Wednesdays, 10 people cancel. So then on Sunday, you might not even put an oversell on, but on Wednesdays, you might put a 10-room oversell on because you know that that's all going to wash out. And that gets very, very tricky to do because you definitely don't want to be in a situation where you're relocating 10 people, because talk about reputation management, that certainly will damage it. Not only that, but we have travel loyalty programs or these reward programs like Marriott Rewards, Hilton Honors, and I'm not sure what the one is for Hyatt, but all of these reward programs have top-tier members. And if you end up relocating, walking one of those top-tier members, that's very costly. It almost costs you like 2 or 3 rooms for just relocating one person. So these are all considerations. So because of that, yes, 100% is what we would like to be at, but sometimes 60% could be good. I'll be honest, out on the west side, if you're at a 60% on a Friday or Saturday, you're doing pretty good. So it kind of depends on the market. Good question. Yes, sir.
Doing reputation management, at what level is it going to be the corporate or the general manager that you decide we want to instill a better brand loyalty in our customers? So let's cut back on the price so we can get more people and have a better like physical reach. Does that happen at like the corporate level and they say like, okay, this is going to be our brand like image, this is what we're going for in this next year? Or if you're like a management company, do you get to decide that? Like, okay, my goal for us as the general manager this year is more capture versus more revenue.
Yes, I think the answer to your question is there is a lot more input than you might think from the property itself, because the brands basically guide the overall brand like culture, like whatever the brand culture is, but they expect their general managers and directors of sales to be the boots on the ground and really subject matter experts to execute whatever the plan is. Okay. And then based on your ownership group and your management company, those two groups will work together, but from information that you give them to make determinations on what it's going to be. So you really have a lot to say. Because I could say that we're going to increase revenue by $1 million next year, and here's how we're going to do it. and that plan could be, garbage, but I could make it sound really good.
Right.
So that's why it's important for it not to just be, and why a lot of people say it's not just one person that creates the plan. It's going to be your revenue management team. It's going to be your ownership, your asset manager. It's going to be your the vice presidents for your company, or even your corporate director of sales and marketing. So there's different people involved. It can get kind of tedious, and sometimes you can have groups that aren't aligned on what we should do. But I think that's good because it creates dialogue. It creates kind of differing opinions, and together we can come to like an agreement, and that will create a better plan than if you just do it on your own.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We should have more time, but time's up. Let's give him a
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you all. All right, thanks, Professor Phil. Appreciate it. Did I run too long? No? Okay, go.
No.